great literature is about creating this miracle of empathy between the writer and the reader. And this is very miraculous, also very mysterious. How exactly it works, I'm not sure. Why is it that these black signs on a white paper create a movie inside a brain? And this miracle of empathy is the greatest political value of literature.
Als ich Francesca Melandri treffe, fällt mir ihre warmherzige Klarheit auf. Mit großer Empathie und zugleich kritischem Blick betrachtet sie die Realität und erzählt ihre Geschichten. Francesca Melandri gehört zu den aufregendsten Stimmen der italienischen Gegenwartsliteratur. Sie schreibt über politische Ereignisse, doch immer von den Menschen aus. Bereits als junge Erwachsene hatte Melandri sich in Italien als Drehbuchautorin für Kino- und Fernsehfilme einen Namen gemacht. Mit ihrem ersten Roman Eva schläft wurde sie über Ländergrenzen hinweg bekannt. Seid dabei, wenn ich Francesca Melandri treffe. Welcome to The Book of My Life. My name is Jagoda Marinić. I'm a writer and host of the show, and I'm happy to lead you through a conversation about books, life, and the world. My guest today is a very prolific writer, and I'm glad to have you here. Welcome, Francesca Melandri.
Thank you so much for this invitation.
I'm very curious because you brought so many books. You must be a vivid reader.
Oh, yes, that's definitely true. And I have been all my life, really since a very, very young age. I don't remember my life without reading and almost without writing, I must say. The two have gone really very much together. I was one of those little kids always with a nose in a book.
But you didn't bring a children's book, though.
Well, actually, this one is, and maybe, I don't know if we can start with it, or
you mean the fairy tales?
The fairy tales, yes.
Okay. But maybe first, before you start talking about the book, when you say you can't imagine yourself as a writer, what was the very first book you read as a kid? Do you remember?
Well, actually, probably this one, which is why I chose it.
So let's start with it.
Yes.
You're heading towards it straight for.
Yes, we go directly into my history as a reader. So the Fiabe Italiane by Italo Calvino is this amazingly wonderful collection of, as the title says, Italian fairy tales, which come from all the regions of Italy. And as you know, Italy is not a very big country, but it's a very diverse country. So each regional character is extremely different. Someone from Torino is really very, very different from someone in Abruzzo. And someone in Friuli is very, very different from someone in Sardinia, which is one of the wonderful things about Italy, which I love a lot. And this is a collection of stories which had already been collected by folklore collectors, a little bit like the Grimm brothers, but which Calvino, with his wonderful pen, rewrote in a very clear, essential, simple, but poignant style. And we had this copy of the book at home. As you can see, it's a big book. And I can't really remember reading any other book before this. I must have. I'm sure I have, but I don't remember them. They were not so important. But this was the book which I read and reread and reread. And I have still the copy. I got it from the family bookstores, bookshelves. And it's completely ruined and all the pages are, but it's my copy. And this has also been extremely important for me in many different ways. Some, I would say, this was my first lesson in style. The language which Calvino uses is, as I said, extremely simple. And it's just fact, 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 fact. The princess did this, and then she did this, and then the witch did this. There are no adjectives, there are no adverbs. It's just storytelling. With no opinions, with no judgments. But of course, the opinions and the judgments about the characters come out from this extremely bare bones narrative. And this, I'm sure, has had a big influence in how I think about what I will write. Not necessarily how I will write, but this aiming at the maximum expressivity with the less information as possible, with the less words, basically.
And actually skipping all the judgment, right? You want to have the impression of the moral in the character, in the story.
Exactly. And this for me is still very important. Of course, I have opinions also about the things I write, strong opinions. But I prefer to share my doubts with my reader and then maybe give them, an idea of what my opinion could be. But this is really my personal opinion, but never to make it a statement. And I'm sure that having had read and reread these fairy tales somehow really shaped me in this way. And then there is also a professional reason why this book is very important. So many of these fairy tales, which is probably one of the reasons why I like them so much, have as a protagonist the third daughter. And I am a third daughter. I am the third of 3 sisters. Then my father remarried and had another daughter, but in my original family, I was the last one. I was the youngest. And there is this pattern which is repeated very often. There was this king, and he had 3 beautiful daughters, and the first one was very beautiful and very intelligent. The second was more beautiful and more intelligent, and the third one was like amazing. And I like that a lot.
I believe that. Yeah. That's
like
when we as kids, we used to say like the parents practice, and with every kid they get a little bit better in the kids they get. But it's not true for all the kids, but it's certainly true for you.
Certainly, I was left much more free to experiment. So this was a pattern. And then, of course, she's the heroine. She's the one who does the cool stuff. So I love that, of course. And one in particular, there are many stories like this, but one in particular is called Fanta-Ghirò. Fanta-Ghirò, persona bella. Fanta-Ghirò, beautiful person. And she's a princess, the third child, and she is very bored with being just a girl. Or not with being a girl, but with doing just the girls' stuff, which are boring because they had no freedom. So she pretends to be a man and does the cool stuff. And it's her story of also a prince falling in love with her, and he actually feels that she's a woman, but she looks like a man. So it's a complicated story. And I loved this story a lot. And when I was very young, but I was already a professional screenwriter. I started working as a screenwriter when I was 19, was when I signed my first contract. So I can't remember exactly, maybe 21, but really very, very young. I suggested to an Italian broadcasting channel that we make a TV movie about Fanta-Ghirò, and they said yes. So I wrote the script. And this was also not really my first success, but it was my first really big success in Italian television. It's still broadcast.
It is a great...
Even now,
I was a fan. Yeah.
When I go around doing readings for my books, now I write literature and these complex historical novels. And there are many former young girls who are now adults, who are now my readers, who used to be the target audience of Fanta-Ghirò, the movie, the TV movie, and they come and say, yes, we really like your books, but Fanta-Ghirò is why we are really fans. And I'm always very happy about that.
And she comes from you reading this as a kid. And how were you like? I mean, when you were a kid, was this feeling of the boys have the more interesting life?
I was very lucky, definitely very lucky. And this is something, by the way, which I also talk about in Cold Feet. Both my father and also my mother They really had no ideas of what should be something done by girls or something done by boys. So we were all left very free. But as a third child, I was even more free. I was very allowed to have physical freedom. When we spent our summers in the mountains, I was always up in trees and going around with my little tent and exploring. So I didn't have this as a problem, but I saw my friends, my girlfriends, and some of them did have that. And they sneaked out of their families to do these cool things, which for me were normal with me or with us. This was the 70s. This was another time. So I was like living with a double consciousness, because I never had a problem with being only a girl. That's a concept I never had. It was not in my family. And of this, I really thank both my parents.
And how was it when you became a writer? I mean, for many women, this is an adventurous life as well. It's not a regular job. It's not a path to it. You have to cave out your own path. Is this an adventure? Is this something you imagined early, that you want to become a writer?
So I have a very strange story about this, which I call strange because I myself don't really understand it, but this is how it went. So, as I said before, I've always been a little child, a little kid with my nose in books. Also, being the third child, I learned to read and write early, because that's when my older sisters, when they went to school, even if I wasn't yet in school. And I was also from a very early age, writing little poems, satirical poems about my older sisters. They had the strength, but I had the words.
How much younger were you?
Well, the middle sister is a little less than 3 years older than me. And then I have a much older sister who is 13 years older than me. And so I was always writing. I also don't remember my life without writing, honestly. I can't really remember when I was not always with my little notebook. So I think I wrote my first collection of short stories, which wasn't published, and it should not be published. But I think I wrote it when I was like 13 or 14. So this is what I was doing. So everyone thought it was normal or nothing shocking that I started making a living out of writing, as I said very early, as a screenwriter. But at the same time, everybody who knew me and who also knew about my passion for literature and for books, not just movies, books, they were also saying, yes, okay, you're a screenwriter, but when will you write your book? Which you will obviously write. No. And this is the mystery, which I myself can't really explain. This happened, say, when I was in my 20s, and I was already a very active screenwriter. My answer was always the same. And don't ask me why I gave this answer, but this is the answer I gave. Yes, I will certainly write literature, but not before I am 40. Which is exactly what happened. Why did I know this? I have no idea. I can only imagine, but again, really, it's something I can only, try to give an explanation a posteriori, is that my respect and regard for the power of the pure word, not the applied word, as in screenplays. I love movies. I also love, but that's another art in which the word is very important, but it's just a part of a bigger enterprise, which has also many other aspects. But my regard and my esteem for these objects, books, the pure word, which makes you have a movie in your head, and the power of this connection between the author and the reader was something I held in such, respect and depth, and something that had to do with, I would say, wisdom, with a passage of having understood something about life, having something to say, having really something to say, knowing something about life and the world. And I was so young, and I was very aware of my youth. So yeah, I guess you can say, yeah, I had this talent for words. Obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be doing that. But I was very aware that my box was still very much empty of life. I had lived very little. I was 21, 22, 23. So I gave this answer. And it's not that then when I turned 40, I said, okay, now this is the time. It didn't go like this. It just happened that at 40 something, 41, I finally felt ready. Yes, I'm going to write this novel. And I had no fear, no hesitation. Eva Sleeps was my first novel, and it just was the obviously right thing to do, which wasn't before.
Do you think you protected yourself from the effects of being a writer too early? Or was it just
I had no
humbleness?
idea. I honestly had no idea of what not the screenwriter's life, but the literary writer's life is. I had really no idea. So I had no protection about it. Oh, and another element, which I think is relevant. Again, this is my story. Of course, it's not at all every author's story, not even every woman's author's story, not at all. But it's my story. My story is that as long as I was a mother of small children, I had 2 children. I have 2 children. Now they're grown-ups. But when they were very, very young, that was my, to use a horrible word, project. I felt so creative in being a mother. I was still writing as a screenwriter, but I put so much of my creativity, joyful creativity, in being a mother. I loved being a mother of small children. I love small children. So there was also, of course, being a mother of small children also needs a lot of time and energy, and you don't have much more time and energy. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying that I was frustrated that I couldn't write my book because I was a mother. Not at all. It just didn't come to me yet. I was doing that, and that was really nice. And then when I had more inner space, then it was the obvious thing to do next, to write a novel which I tried to write, holding myself to that very high standard, which I had always had and I still have. And whether the results are that high, it's not for me to say, but I know that is what I aim at.
This time when you dedicated most of your time to being a mother to small children, you said your box was empty. So is that a time of your life where it got richer in understanding?
Of course.
I mean, you write a lot about relationships between
Exactly.
parents and children, and I feel like you've been collecting or building layers of understanding between human relationships and how interconnected we are with our parents.
Exactly. With our parents, with our children, with our siblings, vertical, up, down, horizontal, through time, through geography. So I guess you could say that in these years, not thinking about it, but what I was actually doing, I was filling the box, living. Also, I mean, literature, what is the object of literature? The human experience. And something else I also did before being a mother, and also with my partner, when we still had 1 child, we traveled a lot. Since I started working as a screenwriter full-time and earning very good money, very young, I was already very young when I also took a pause from it and started to really feel the need to go out again of the box and fill it with other things.
Was it a liberation for you to break free from the script writing world into the book world? What did you lose and what did you gain?
So I really liked being a screenwriter, and I'm very happy I've done it for so many years. Also, I was mostly writing TV series. I also wrote some movies, but a lot of longer seriality. Never the very long ones, but maybe 16 episodes. And then the series maybe was reproduced. So season 2, season 3, so many episodes with the same characters. And at the end of my career, by then I was very often head writer. So I was the head of continuity of that universe. So I always say that that was my boot camp in dramaturgy. I've been a marine in the boot camp, a marine boot camp of dramaturgy when you are doing this long serial or medium long serial narrative. And I'm very grateful for that. What this has given me now, I'm fearless. I mean, after being the one who had to remember through 16 episodes, 12 characters or 20 characters, I'm not afraid of intertwining stories now. I've been in a handwork laboratory. I've been in an artisanal laboratory. And another aspect I really liked about screenwriting is the group work, the teamwork. I'm also a filmmaker myself. I've also done documentaries. I also like to be on the other side of the camera. And the visuals. I loved working with actors. Actors are a screenwriter's best friend or toughest critic, especially when you write dialogue, because they know if you have written good dialogue or if it's not really, or if it looks good, but it's actually not so good. And good actors have have taught me many important things, both about dialogues and about character development. How to, dive inside a character. When I write my novels, or even in Kaltefusse, I could say that a part of my work, when I go inside a characters and explore the world from that viewpoint, I'm actually doing something which is very similar to an actor's job, only that then they act it out and I describe it.
But you have a fable for mystery. I mean, the way you told your story with the way you started writing at 40. So do you enjoy being now being more a book writer because there's more space for the mystery, more space for the creation of your own world without being dependent and getting into other people's imagination?
Now I am the captain of my own ship. Good or bad, this is my book. I'm responsible for it. You can love it, you can hate it. I wrote it. Nobody else came into this.
Where does that desire come from? Everybody nowadays says we have to be part of groups. It's our brain. We want to be connected and wired. And then it's also something in us human beings.
Absolutely.
Like I want to be the captain of my ship.
Yes.
What is this?
We want to be both. And I think art has always been navigation of these two opposites. There are, again, like filmmaking is definitely a team work, probably I would say the most intensely teamwork form of art. Then there's music, of course. You maybe the composer writes music, maybe alone, maybe, but then they play together, and of course it's very much a group thing. Literature, writing, by definition, is the most solitary art. And there isn't a value judgment in all of these. All these are experiences of the human condition. We do all these things. We are alone and sometimes lonely, and we are in groups, and we sometimes feel excluded by groups, like being groups, all the group dynamics, all this belongs to the human experience.
So now we have had the dreams, the becoming a writer through a story that you read as a kid. Where would you like to continue?
I would like to continue with Conrad.
Okay.
Conrad was one of the many authors I fell in desperate love with as a teenager. I can't tell you all of them. I mean, there are just too many. We would have 100 books here.
Do you think it's a time of life where the intensity of reading is stronger than later?
That's a very good question. Isn't the intensity of everything stronger than later?
I don't know
It's a question.
Maybe because the first time of
It's the first time of everything. Conrad wasn't the only author. Another one was definitely Chekhov. But I couldn't give you the titles of all the books. that
you had to choose.
I had to
That's the
choose.
main
I had to
thing
choose.
about the show, yeah.
So I had the great fortune of being able to read in English because my family were bilingual. So I was actually reading much more in English than in Italian.
And how come they were bilingual?
Well, my family lived in the States. We're Italian, but my family lived for a long time in the States before I was born. And my mother is a translator was a translator from English. She translated many very important books. For instance, Moby Dick by Herman Melville, and she translated several books by Mark Twain and Lawrence Stern, so classics. So we had all these English language books at home, and I studied also in English. Actually, my first essays, attempts at writing for me, not just for school, actually were in English, not in Italian, because I went to English schools, where creative writing was very much a very important subject, much more than in an Italian school, which was also very fortunate. So back to Conrad. So Conrad was one of the authors, and also many other of his books. But if I had to choose one, I chose The Shadow Line. I can still remember exactly, first of all, where I was. And I remember this feeling of, how can I explain it? Of being swept by this ocean of human truth about something I had no idea, no experience about. The shipping routes of the colonial merchant navy in the of the British merchant navy in the 19th century, something I had nothing to do with. And nevertheless, the depth of recognition of, yes, he's really talking about my species, human beings, of another gender, of another age, of a completely different background, doing things I have no idea, I don't even know the name of the sails. And still, it is actually talking about something I can so deeply relate with. How is this possible? How is this possible? And second sentence, I want to do it too. I want to do it too. I want to try this magic. I want to try to bring someone else in a world they maybe have nothing to do with, no experience of, no knowledge, and yet, as they will be reading something that I have written, maybe they would also feel, yes, I'm talking about the human condition, and we're describing it together, me as a writer and the reader, just as I was doing as a reader to what Joseph Conrad was doing to me. He was doing something to me, which I wanted to do to others.
I find it very interesting that you say that he connected you with your species, and your species is mankind, like human condition.
Human condition.
Because now we always say in books we need representation, we need people who are like us, who look like us, we need role models. And then I feel like you're completely throwing that concept around, and you say, I'm actually looking for a deeper truth beyond all sociological markers. Is that something that you find strange in our times, that people put each other in sociology boxes, and that you are rather looking into deeper truths where you think we're not so defined by where statistics would define us?
So I think maybe there are two levels to this question, but I'm still thinking about it. Of course, I think about this, not just because people maybe ask me, but it's a question of our time. So, of course, and I cannot tell you that I have very, very strong opinions. It's more like, again, I'm trying to find, what do I think about this? And as of today, these are the viewpoints I like to look at. One is that there is a reason why there is this call for diversity of representation. There are very good reasons, which I totally not just understand, but I agree with. And as a woman, even just as a woman of a privileged European background, but still as a woman, my voice in the thousands of years of my species' history has not been the dominant voice. And many voices of the people like me, of my gender, who would have existed, could not happen because they weren't allowed to study, so they couldn't bring their narrative to the world, or maybe they brought it and it was totally forgotten, it was not put into the canon. So I totally get the necessity for giving more facets to this human condition. It cannot be only represented by, to go with a cliche, old white men of a certain kind. Not because their point of view of white men is not important, but because it's just one of many. And so I really understand this, and I am very interested in looking at, or being helped to look at things from other viewpoints by authors who come from absolutely different backgrounds from the one I have, and it's always very enriching, and I think this is necessary, and I think this is a very positive development, that there is more attention to this. And by the way, I really have to say, people talk about diversity of representation more than there actually still exists. It's still not a done deal.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And I think it's easy to overstate, oh yes, it's a done deal now, everyone who is not, again, of the majority or the dominant group, what are they complaining about? It's actually not true, and this should not be forgotten. We talk about the fact that there is more need of representation, more than there is actually still representation. So I'm all for different voices. And this is one level. Mm-hmm. And then there is another one, which is the one you were referencing, which is we still all belong to the same species, which is a very complex species. We have this mystery between our frontal lobes, which we still haven't understood how it works. And this makes us a very interesting and terrible animal. And our terribility and danger also to the ecosystem is not limited to just, for instance, white men. We have always been very destructive since time immemorial. The big great fauna extinction was many thousands of years ago. So it doesn't have to do with this story now of the domination of the European. And I like to see the interest for me in looking at the shadow sides of all the components of human experience without dividing people in, you're the victim, therefore you must be necessarily always the good one. You're the perpetrator, therefore you must always be necessarily the bad one, and that's it. This is not our species. The story of our species is much more interesting than this. So in this respect, I don't agree with giving a stereotyped, obviously I don't agree to giving a stereotyped representation of roles. Also because we are multitudes. There are multitudes inside of us, as Walt Whitman said, and we contain multitudes, and these multitudes some of them can be very wonderful, some can be very horrible in all of us. And not to mention that being a victim doesn't make you a good person. It's so complicated. And we should be fearless in analyzing the less palatable sides of everyone.
But here you entered the world of man in a way, and you felt so connected.
Absolutely. Again, because this is the power of amazing literature. I am very connected with a certain guy who lived 700 years ago in Florence, and then he was exiled. I don't think he was a very, maybe not nice as a person, but he was a very intelligent guy who was called Dante Alighieri. And when I read the Inferno of the Divina Commedia, I still can connect to these very foreign experiences. This was the Middle Ages, just before the Renaissance, with the Rinascimento. This is a very far away, distant world from me. And yet there is something in how he describes the pity he feels for Paolo and Francesca, or the anger of some of his characters, as something that I know what he's talking about. I really do.
Let's go on, because I could listen to your stories for hours on each book, I'm afraid. So let's take him, or is it too early?
It's fine. It's fine.
It's Primo Levi?
It's Primo Levi. And I can see that you here have an edition which is both Se questo è un uomo, Estás en Mensch, and The Atempause. What a beautiful translation. In Italian, the title is La Tregua, which is actually the book I chose, which I had on my list, not Se questo è un uomo, which is, of course, Primo Levi's most famous book about his experiences as a prisoner of Auschwitz. But La Tregua is the story of what came after he was liberated. Mm-hmm. And then it's his long journey home. It's his very, very long journey home, which, by the way, at the beginning starts in the wrong direction, because he starts going east instead of west towards Italy, northeast. So he actually goes through Russia and then has a very long detour through Belarus and Ukraine and so on until he finally gets back to Torino, his home city. And, well, I chose it for several reasons. Again, I definitely wanted to have in my list Primo Levi, because as a writer, he's one of those writers like Conrad and like Calvino, I feel personal gratitude towards. I wouldn't be who I am without their books. Not to mention I wouldn't be the writer I am, but I wouldn't be the person I am without their books. So I had to have a Primo Levi book. It was very difficult to choose which one. But this one in particular has to do also with the book, my last book, which is also a story about a returning from war. Mm-hmm. And it's a story of my father. And since I've been writing this book, Cold Feet, I have been also looking at this book in a different way. It always felt to me that the truth, La Tregua, is really the story of how Primo, the writer and the person, reconnected with being a human being after his humanity. Someone had attempted to destroy it, of course, without making it, but and he really reconnects with being a human being a body who moves in space, in freedom, maybe even lost and very hungry, and trying and having an objective, having an aim, home, but with a free will. Mm-hmm. And it's also sometimes a very funny book. Of course, it's a tragic book because it takes place in devastated Europe, in masses of destruction and pain and violence everywhere. But sometimes it's even very funny. It's a life-affirming book, which I remember also when I read it for the first time, how thankful I was to this man, this person who had been through that and still could write something that made me, a young woman of a very much more easy and privileged time, think, well, not everything is bad about humanity. Again, we go back to humanity, the shared humanity.
And somehow I feel that coming home is a huge topic for you.
It is.
Though one could say you're Italian, you're rooted, you have this language. Why is coming home, or not even coming home, but coming home, not to a place, but coming home into your wholeness?
To oneself, to the wholeness.
Yeah.
That's a very beautiful word. Thank you. That's exactly it. To the wholeness. I think one of the many reasons, if you ask writers why they write, they will give you many different answers. But I think that in all of our very different ways, one of the reasons to become a writer is to attempt, it's always an attempt, you never make it completely, an attempt at getting a little closer to a wholeness of understanding, of expression. The old-fashioned word is wisdom, which is the word which, when I was in my 20s and people asked me, what's up, why aren't you writing your novel? I still didn't feel I could claim, which I still don't. I definitely still don't, but I definitely have more experience, yes.
And the relationship between the doubt that you also like, the ambiguity and the wisdom, how do you connect these? Because on the one hand, you seem to cherish wisdom, you want to sort of transmit something about life that maybe is not so easy to understand. And on the other hand, I always sense that you're also trying not to be too aware, not trying to be too sure about something. Like you value these both, though they seem contradictory again.
That's exactly right. I try to live in this way. Now I will be very pompous. I try to live in this way. I try to live as if I was really the person deciding my actions. So trying to take responsibility for them, to enjoy them, to fight them when I feel they're wrong, to act in the world as an agent. I claim my agency. And that is one of the levels of my life. And then there is another level. And for me, my being has to be both. There's another level in which my real and only and deepest and most precious mission in life, goal, or path, maybe more path in life, is to be constantly aware that my viewpoints, which I'm having now a viewpoint here in the studio, I'm watching things from my viewpoint, which makes me have opinions and impressions and also experiences, is only one of the infinite viewpoints you could have. And this sometimes clashes with agency, because to be an agent, sometimes you have to claim a viewpoint, which I also do. But for me, it wouldn't feel whole, that wholeness you were mentioning about. For me, wholeness is putting this together with the awareness that mine is just one of the many, many, many viewpoints possible in life.
So that's where the ambivalence comes in.
The ambivalence and the never really... I so love changing my mind when presented with good arguments. This is something I really like. I don't feel diminished by changing my
most
life.
People think it's like a defeat, you know.
Absolutely not. I am thankful to someone who, with good arguments, I'm not easy to convince. But when I'm convinced, I'm so happy to evolve and shift my perspective. It's also more interesting, you know. Oh, so I've had this perspective. Maybe it's not now that I don't want it anymore, but I can add. It must not necessarily be an either or. It can also be this and this. And I find this so much more interesting. And I hope to offer this also to my readers in the way I write, to have this and maybe also something else.
Francesca, we don't have much time to dig deep into Italian policy, but now that you brought Calvino, and I found it very impressive how you described that he's sort of, that you like this book, because many people bring other books of him, so it's not a frequent choice, yeah, which I really like about your choice. And the way you admire that he could go back to living a life, to go his wholeness, to reconquer his sensual approach to being a human being in this world, and having been gifted this life and having not been taken away from it. I mean, now we have so many discussions about Europe and right extremism rising in Europe. We can't go that deep, but still I wonder, when you read this, and this is something about also remembering the horror that European history brought to some people, is it for you something where you wonder, are we forgetting this, or are his stories or his books, are they important in these days to be reread so we understand our own times better?
Yes, but not with a finger like this. That's not what literature is about, and certainly that is not why Primo Levi wanted to be read as a, now I will chide you and discipline you in your forgetfulness. This is really not what great literature is about. Great literature is about creating this miracle of empathy between the writer and the reader. And this is very miraculous, also very mysterious. How exactly it works, I'm not sure. Why is it that these black signs on a white paper create a movie inside a brain? And this miracle of empathy is the greatest political value of literature, more than any remembering past horrors, which of course have to be part of our history, but more than anything else is this connection of empathy for experiences which are not your own, like what happened to me with the young captain of the ship on his first captainship of the Shadow Line, something I have never experienced, never will experience, and yet somehow moved me to a broader understanding of what the human experience, we keep on going back there, is. And I think that is the most important requirement of democracy, which is, what is democracy? Plurality. What is the opposite of democracy? Totalitarianism, which is this and only this is good, and everyone else and that, and especially those people, are bad. And democracy is the opposite in the sense that it allows for very different voices, sometimes very contrasting voices, not to shoot at each other, but to talk to each other. And this is done in parliaments. Parlare in Latin and in Italian means to speak. You don't shoot at each other, you talk to each other. And then you have to write laws which somehow have the majority of the votes. And you have to somehow feel, at some level, some empathy for the viewpoint of others. This is democracy. So this mystery, this mysterious magic of what happens between a book and a reader, I think that in its sense is very political.
You just said about listening to voices that are very different. One of the most different voices, if there's something like that, is certainly Emily Dickinson.
Oh, yes.
In the way she lived her life and in the way she wrote her poems.
She was an alien.
Yeah. Yes.
An extraterrestrial.
Yes. So what does she mean to your reader's biography?
So if I could choose a way to honor Emily Dickinson, would be me not speaking about her, but just doing one of two things or both, listening to one of her poems and then just staying silent for a little bit.
So it's actually the sensuality of the language and the imaginary
silence, which is underlying everything that we have been speaking about. So let's go back again to this image of these two aspects, the feeling an agent but also being aware that you're just one of many infinite viewpoints. Then there is a third element underneath all this. And this third element is what Emily told us about. And that is, there is something which is far beyond either or even the combination of these two. And that is something which is, normal people experience it when they're in love, when they're in nature, when they look at their children, when they hold the hand of someone who's dying, or when they look at the face of someone who has just died, someone they love. It's an experience which most people do at some point, this connection with something which is so much bigger than the personal. But because it's so big, it's so difficult to express. And she was one of the very few who managed to express this ocean. It's an ocean of stillness and of being, which is underlying all our multitude of experiences and characteristics and viewpoints.
At what age did you discover her for yourself?
So she was not a book which I had in my hands when I was a teenager. I think I discovered her in my late 20s. Another book, but again, I would have brought 50 books,
Yes.
which is for me another expression, a contemporary expression of this kind of stillness underneath the chaos and the interest, the beauty and the horror, is Etty Hillesum, her diaries. And this was the same time when I read Etty Hillesum's diary and Emily Dickinson's poems. They connected me to this deeper level, which I've always been very attracted to.
When in your life did you need that kind of feeling for there's an ocean to be discovered in literature that has not so much to do with the, I think,
With the human,
yeah,
somehow.
yeah.
It is human because only as humans we can experience it.
Yeah, but it's not the everyday fights for life. It's not the
Exactly.
hero's journey.
So I guess I had the very infinite fortune of having a childhood in nature. In Südtirol, in South Tyrol. That's where I spent all my summers as a little Fanta-Ghirò, climbing on trees again, making dams on the rivers, and sometimes with my sisters, sometimes with friends, but a lot of it also alone, very happily alone. And I think children, when they are not tampered with, or most children, let's say, when they are given a chance, when they're let free, as again my parents so wonderfully did, and there is not always telling them what they should be doing or what they should be feeling, most children have a very easy and immediate intuition of this ocean of being. In fact, there's a very wonderful quotation from the Shadow line. At the very beginning is, I think the very first line is something, it was one of those moments which you have in your youth. You don't have it in childhood, because in childhood you don't have moments. You have this just being, this experience of being. Children know it, experience it. Very wise people experience it. People who have these moments of, we call it the flow, maybe athletes or artists when they're writing, or people, in love. So it's a human experience. Again, it's not nothing exoteric. It's not nothing that you have to meditate for 30 years on a rock. It's something
But
very
it's a connection to something immaterial.
bigger.
somehow. Yeah.
Something which is bigger than us, bigger than our immediate ring of people, bigger than our society, even bigger than our species. It has to do with the ecosystem, has to do with the planet, it has to do with watching the stars, and as we have all done, wondering. And it's very easy to talk about it in a banal way, because it's so difficult to put words to it. It's the most difficult thing. She made it.
She made it. Our time is almost out, or it's actually out, but I need to have a really short thought on this book you brought on Nelson Mandela. I find it so interesting because you've been talking a lot about this fear that Emily Dickinson writes about, and then you said things about agency that you don't relate to, but here you brought somebody who really stands for agency.
Absolutely.
So your last thoughts in this show and the way books shaped you is my curiosity finding out about why did you bring Nelson Mandela and why is his agency something you enjoyed reading?
Yes, I'm very happy to do so. So in every list of books I'm asked to bring as important books, it's so difficult, so many, and sometimes I change them, but this book is always present. It's the only one, maybe with Fiabe Italiana. Maybe these two are the pillars. Why? Well, because I think that Nelson Mandela is exactly what I was talking about, of the wholeness of a human being, of these two aspects together. Obviously, he was so much an agent of his will against a brutal regime. He paid an amazing price, 27 years in prison, and a very refined political vision. But on the other hand, this book, by the way, he was a great writer. It's written very well, is suffused with a love for humanity, for an understanding of humanity, and, this other point, also for a search always to get in touch with the viewpoint of what other people would have called the enemy, dehumanizing the viewpoint of the other person. For instance, his jailers. And he always attempted to, while obviously not agreeing with anything they were thinking or even what they were doing, and some of the things they were doing were terribly bad also against himself, but he never, ever lost the fundamental concept that they were also human beings, and he should see them as such. He should engage with them as such. And this has always been, and he speaks about this in this book, his way of triumphing. These were people who, by definition, were denying his humanity as a black man in a white supremacist regime, who were saying, you are not a man, you are not a human being, you're just a black person. And he understood, just like Martin Luther King also understood very well, that the only way to triumph on this horror is to never forget that the people doing this to you are also human beings. And never forgetting this about them, at some point, makes it obvious to them that you are too. And it's such a moving and deep and profound and precious teaching. This is, again, one of the books. My copy is completely broken. I've read it so many times, and I love this man so much.
And it is maybe a very timely book to read. A book.
I would definitely recommend this book to everyone now. In these very difficult times, we really need voices like Mandela. And I can't think of anybody who would not be profoundly moved and enriched by this book.
Francesca, I was profoundly moved and enriched by your choices and the explanations, and to enter a little bit of your inner library and the way you present it. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Jagoda.
Thank you.